In recent discussions, we talk about a character like Red Hood, character like Jason Todd. There's a repeated pattern when it comes to villains in
Hmm.
comics and on film. When a villain gets very popular, a la Venom or Red Hood, a lot of these companies like Marvel and DC, they want to make more money off these characters. So
Yep.
the villains, they become anti-heroes, and a transition to get them a solo series, spin-off books, merchandising, etc., because they cannot promote a straight up villain in its own book and promote what they're doing and celebrate killing people and torturing people, etc., etc. So they make these guys anti-heroes to sell to the crowd.
T-shirts.
Right. How many Venom t-shirts are out there now due to the movie or whatever? That phase of Venom in the 90s, I'll eat your brains and that other bullshit. So we have that. They promote these characters, they change the narrative on these characters. They make them, oh, they're misunderstood. Or they did that because of they're traumatized. And it's okay they did that because now they kill the bad guys now instead of just citizens or people are in the way or bystanders. And I think it hurts the character, and I think it's a detriment. I think sure you lock in profits, and I know as a businessman, like you want to sell to the crowd, but I think that in selling to the crowd, I think you really hurt what makes that character special in the first place. Or why people love them as a villain. When you have Venom transition to be the lethal protector in San Francisco, something's off. You're cheering for a person who pretty much tried to kill Peter Parker multiple times, killed bystanders, killed police, threatened to kill Mary Jane, showing up to the crib, eating cookies with Aunt May. You got a person who's really personal who can really threaten your friends and family. And all of a sudden, oh, because he can web up a couple bad guys, all right, all's in the past, dude. And this whole anti-hero thing, I think it's bullshit. It kind of milks the character dry. You got a character like Red Hood who works best as a villain, who works
Hmm.
best as a ghost of Bruce Wayne's failure, and left at that.
Caught an ass whooping and decided, yeah, man, you know what, Bruce, you were right all along. It's okay that the Joker is still alive. It's okay that I got blown up and got damn near beat to death with a crowbar and all of that. It's okay because this ass whooping that you gave me let me know that the way I was doing it was wrong. But I'm still gonna try to keep all of the teenage angst and anger and gadgets and edge lord accessories, but I'm not gonna kill people anymore, even though I've killed people before. But please, let's work together because if we continue working together, that's gonna make me not want to kill people anymore, and it's gonna make me not hate you any less. Like what? What? Huh?
It doesn't make sense for him. For Dick Grayson, for Barbara, for Tim, for Damien, even a little bit of Damien, it makes sense for those guys. They didn't get beat to death by a crowbar. They didn't get killed and then revived by the Lazarus pit. They didn't get to see that dark side of basically being enlisted as a soldier in the Wayne military and dying in battle for his cause, and
Hmm.
then finding out that his cause and his methods aren't viable.
The thing I've never understood in terms of introduction to characters, how many characters that are anti-heroes were introduced as anti-heroes? Like, is it a prerequisite that every character who's established as an anti-hero always has to start out as a bad guy? If we really want to get into it like that, dog, like this is like professional wrestling a little bit. I mean, Stone Cold Steve Austin ended up becoming one of the biggest stars in the history of that industry. He started out as a bad guy initially. He started out as the guy who was feuding with one of the good guys. And through circumstances, because you introduced a character in Vince McMahon who was worse than him, he was introduced as the only option who could stand up to that type of character because he already had those type of rough edges to him. In professional wrestling, I think it works because it goes by crowd reaction. The only reason Stone Cold Steve Austin eventually became a good guy is because the fans got behind him and were a fan of the character because they believed in what it was he was doing. With a lot of these characters that we see, like a Cable, even though Cable was never a good guy, like a Red Hood or a Venom. Again, I mean, I get it, T-shirts, merchandising, and shit like that. But eventually, at some point in time, you're gonna get a Red Hood revival as a bad guy, but it's not gonna make sense anymore after a certain point. Like, oh man, now that we even on the topic, it is a lot like wrestling, bro. Because when Stone Cold Steve Austin decided to become a bad guy again and shake hands with Vince McMahon after WrestleMania 16, the reaction that a lot of people had was like, this doesn't make sense.
Right. Yep.
He spent all this time whooping Vince's ass, making him look stupid, and then he's gonna end up shaking his hand. So does that mean that the bad guy ends up winning eventually? Because if the bad guy is gonna win anyway, why are we gonna make him a good guy without giving us an actual reason to make him a good guy? Digress, because we're not even talking about wrestling. There's people who do it better than us anyway.
Right. But you're right about that, because there is a common path for this anti-hero character archetype. We got Venom, we got Red Hood, we got the Punisher, the most celebrated anti-hero of all time, started out as a villain in the Spider-Man book. All right. We got Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn was a straight-up villain in the Batman anime series and comics. Now she's a anti-hero. Deadpool was a villain at first, I believe. Yeah, New Mutants. Yeah, he tried to kill them. Deathstroke, was a straight-up villain. Now he's an anti-hero with his own book.
Loki.
Oh my goodness, Loki, villain turned anti-hero. Repeated pattern where people really like him. Now we gotta redeem them so you can root for them.
Let's really try to get into this here. Like, if you had to do a Webster's dictionary description of anti-hero, how would you put that into words?
I would say that an anti-hero is a character that goes beyond the limits of a normal hero, and to get what his or her wants of justice done, they're willing to go through any means or source to get justice accomplished in their opinion and their mindset.
But they still have a moral code, right? They are not without a moral code, more or less. So let's take it a little bit out of that. Okay, so Negan from The Walking Dead, villain or anti-hero?
Man, that's a villain. Negan's a villain, bro. Like,
okay.
I mean, the only reason why he is an anti-hero is because it's circumstantial. He was beaten and he was spared. He was beaten and spared. You think he would be the way he is now if he won? If he beat Rick Grimes and killed him? Hell no.
Right. And then somebody worse came along after him.
Yeah.
Somebody worse than him came along after him, and he was already subdued. He was already tamed by the time that villain in Alpha came along after him, to where the things that he did that made him a villain, by comparison, didn't look the same because somebody did something worse than he did.
Right. And ultimately, this is survival. He's doing it for survival. The best thing that for him to keep himself alive is to go with the program now and beat the new villain who's bigger and badder and tougher and more evil than he is. Right. So that's a villain. He's no.
Oh, no, man. Yeah.
Ain't no anti-hero in him. Ain't no hero in him.
Okay. Ain't no hero. So you would say that Negan is a villain who was turned into a circumstantial anti-hero.
Yeah, I would say that. And even his actions before of the saviors, and he had people getting food or whatever, that was just resources for him to ultimately survive. They were nothing to him but a tool for his ultimately his own survival. And he knew that if he can gather people, become this ruthless leader, and give everyone their role and their jobs, he can kind of function better than just scavenging out in the woods and going from place to place to place. So even for those who are like, oh, Negan was good to us, he protected us, it's like, yeah, well, only because it was beneficial for him.
Yeah, man. And I feel like that line gets drawn because who are the real villains anymore? I promise you, if we would have got to see, let's say that the Infinity Saga of the Avengers movies was 3 movies instead of just 2. If we would have seen Thanos at least one more time in live action film, at some point there would have been a turn.
Mm.
At some point there would have been we would have been introduced to a redeeming quality to make us look at him in a different light because of exposure. Because we've seen him more, I'm not going to say more than what we needed to see him, but
Mm-hmm.
we would have seen him more than what we expected to see him. The first time we seen Thanos in any kind of capacity was in Guardians of the Galaxy, first movie. Sitting on his throne and he was talking shit. He was basically sunning the main villain of that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, just to show us that there are levels to this villainy shit right here, right?
Right, right.
And for the record, anybody who's confused about what it means to be sunned or to sun anybody, just watch the way that Thanos was talking to Ronan in Guardians of the Galaxy, and that'll give you the perfect description right there, right?
Right, right.
but digress, right? That was our first introduction to him. We seen him in the post credits or the post credit scene from Age of Ultron, and we didn't see him again until Infinity War. Infinity War, he was a complete asshole, but he was really the protagonist of the movie, even though he was the bad guy, which was a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of dynamic because we've rarely ever seen a movie. All of the heroes in that movie were secondary characters to Thanos, even though he was the villain, right?
Right.
It was a hero's journey for a villain.
That one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was a hero's journey for a villain that just so happened to have heroes in it that were established in other movies. Okay, by the end of that movie, you still didn't sympathize with anything that this fucking guy was actually doing because he was crazy. He was out of his fucking mind, right? Like,
Right.
why would anybody go through all of this trouble and all of these trials and all of this pain in order to snap your finger and make half of all life disappear, right? Unless you're
Right.
out of your fucking mind. They don't call him the Mad Titan for no reason, right? And then
Yeah.
in Endgame, you get to see him kind of get his comeuppance. But if there was a third movie with that character being portrayed in the way that he was being portrayed, I promise you that we would have been exposed to a different level, and at some point, the way that we felt towards him would have changed to where it was like, oh man, okay, maybe blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Maybe Thanos was right, right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
So I think the further point that you were trying to touch on as it relates to these villain characters becoming anti-heroes comes down to exposure. Ultimately, it's an issue of exposure. The more you see a bad guy, the more you're exposed to any bad guy in any form of entertainment, whether it be professional wrestling, which goes without saying because everybody is overexposed, and I don't even watch wrestling no more. Whether it be TV shows, movies, comic books, the more you see these characters who are made out to be bad guys being cooler and edgier and more relatable than the good guy characters that they're supposed to be squaring off against, the more you're going to start to sympathize with them.
That's a pretty damn fair assessment because you have a film like The Joker
Mm-hmm.
who's massively overexposed, but you're
Mm-hmm.
actually rooting for the guy who's mad against the world, and the
Yep.
film constructs in a way where you shouldn't be rooting for him, but you are kind of rooting for him. You know what I'm saying? Like you are rooting for him to stick up for himself and to cause chaos and destruction because fuck the world, right? Because they just keep beating him down. You got a character like Loki who started out in the first film and betrayed his brother, and wanted the kingdom for himself. Throughout the films, he started having a brothership and a real relationship with his brother to the point where you're like, oh, you root for Loki now. I love Loki. I don't want to really see him as a bad guy per se anymore, as a straight up bad guy. I want to just see more of him. Harley Quinn massively overexposed. Punisher got massively overexposed. Red Hood, Doc Ock massively overexposed to he replaced Spider-Man in the comic book as the superior Spider-Man.
Which is
So
insane. Fucking insanity.
Doc Ock is Spider-Man, the superior Spider-Man.